Today is Wednesday, October 30th. We'll tell you about the presidential candidates' closing arguments ahead of Election Day, and a reminder from the U.S. Postal Service for anyone who plans to mail their ballots. Also, what a longtime ally of former President Trump had to say after spending time in prison, and a first-of-its-kind report from the Vatican. Plus, a federal watchdog says the Air Force paid $1 million more than it should have for spare parts. An unusual uptick in walking pneumonia among younger kids, and where storms may interrupt Halloween plans this week. Those stories and even more news to know coming up. Welcome to The Newsworthy. All the day's news in around 10 minutes. Fast, fair, fun, and on the go. I'm Erica Mandy. Thanks so much for being here. You ready? Let's do this. Americans have now heard closing arguments from both presidential candidates. First, there was former President Donald Trump's closing arguments from Madison Square Garden. Then last night, it was Vice President Kamala Harris's turn at the grassy ellipse near the White House. In both speeches, the candidates painted the picture of a grim future if the other were to win. For example, last night, Vice President Harris said former President Trump is obsessed with revenge and his own personal interests, not the American people or democracy. She said it's time to turn the page on the drama. 2 days earlier, Trump called his opponent a train wreck, saying she's destroyed everything in her path and that Americans aren't any better off now than they were 4 years ago. And he kept going after Harris's leadership at an event in Pennsylvania last night. But both candidates have also focused on policy issues. In Trump's case, he's promising to secure the southern border and fix the economy, specifically with the largest deportation operation in U.S. history and broad tariffs he says would boost American manufacturing. On the other side, Harris has focused on helping first-time homebuyers and small businesses, giving parents an expanded child tax credit, and bringing back abortion protections. Of course, even though Trump and Harris have called recent events closing arguments, there are still many campaign events ahead in the final 6 days before Election Day, especially in those critical battleground states, as the campaigns are hoping a swing vote here and there may add up to a win in an extremely tight race. And it's not just the polls saying how close it's been. Early voting has brought in both Democratic and Republican voters so far. And all in all, more than 50 million Americans have already cast their ballots, whether it be in person or by mail. And speaking of which, the U.S. Postal Service says anyone who plans to mail in their ballots should do so now, ASAP, so they make it to their election office by Election Day. Though, just as a reminder, the voting rules do vary by state, so make sure you check your state's requirements before you cast your ballot. Steve Bannon has now been released from federal prison, and as expected, he's wasted no time jumping back into the political spotlight. Remember, Bannon is a longtime ally of former President Trump and was at one point the White House's chief strategist under Trump. He just served 4 months in a federal prison for defying a subpoena in the January 6th investigation, since he had refused to testify or hand over documents to the House committee investigating the attack on the Capitol. But he got out of prison yesterday and immediately resumed his support for Trump. Bannon said his time in prison was empowering and that he spent time with working-class minorities who he claims disapprove of Vice President Harris and the Biden administration. Bannon also kept up his criticism of prominent Democrats, claiming former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tried to silence him by sending him to prison. Though remember, his sentence did come from a jury conviction and a judge's order. And despite already serving time, Bannon continues to appeal his conviction. But his legal troubles don't end there. Bannon faces more criminal charges in New York State Court, including money laundering and fraud. There, he's accused of misusing donor funds intended for a U.S.-Mexico border wall. He's pleaded not guilty, and a trial is set for December. The Vatican issued its first annual report on sexual abuse. It comes 10 years after the Vatican created a Commission for Child Protection. The 50-page report details a series of findings and recommendations, including calls for victims of clergy sexual abuse to have greater access to information about their cases, criticizing a lack of transparency. And it says victims have the right to compensation. Pope Francis has called this an effort to evaluate what progress the church has made in more than a dozen countries and what it still must change. One survivor of abuse who sits on the commission said the report is a significant step forward and gives him hope. But leading victims' advocates say it does not go far enough, that the commission itself doesn't have much power, some called it an academic exercise that lacks teeth, and that the Catholic Church cannot self-police when it comes to sexual abuse and the cover-up of that abuse. More than 30 million Americans are being warned about the possibility of severe weather today. Meteorologists say the threat extends from Texas to Iowa, with Kansas City facing the biggest risk. The storm system could bring strong winds, large hail, and even some tornadoes. Then tomorrow, it could spoil Halloween plans for people in places like Dallas, Little Rock, and Memphis. Though by then, the threat is mostly rain. After this system moves through, it will leave cooler weather behind, bringing the temperatures closer to the usual for this time of year. We have more news for you still coming up, but first, thanks to our sponsor. We don't need to wait for the new year to feel our best. In fact, I think it's better to just get started now so you can learn how to manage stress, keep your energy up, and have improved overall health even through the holidays. By the time January comes around, you'll already feel like you've made progress. And Lumen can help. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored, personalized guidance to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management. This is the type of technology that used to only be available to top athletes in clinics. But now, Lumen makes lab-level metabolic testing accessible. I found the insights from my Lumen so fascinating as I realized how the food I eat affects me in all different ways. And thanks to the app's guidance, I can adjust my food choices with confidence. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/newsworthy to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/newsworthy for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. Now, back to the news. A key measure of how good Americans feel about the economy is up ahead of the election. The Conference Board said its Consumer Confidence Index jumped almost 10 points from September to October. That's the biggest increase since March 2021. As for how likely Americans think a recession will be in the next year, that number was the lowest since 2022. All these signs point to Americans generally feeling better about the economy than they have in years. That said, consumer confidence is still down compared to pre-COVID numbers. And while people believe the job market is better than it has been, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said job openings did fall to pre-pandemic levels in September as the labor market continues to cool. A government watchdog report says Boeing charged the U.S. Air Force 8,000% more than the market rate for soap dispensers. While the Inspector General report found these soap dispensers were the most egregious example, they weren't the only spare parts the Air Force apparently overpaid for. Add it all up, and the report found the Air Force spent $1 million more than it should have. The Inspector General launched an investigation after receiving an anonymous tip. Now Boeing says it's reviewing the report, but added it appears to be based on inapt comparisons. Specifically, Boeing says the dispensers the Inspector General used as a comparison were cheaper versions, not fit for military use. The Air Force has yet to respond. For Boeing, add this to the list of issues the aerospace company has faced this year. There have also been safety concerns and a workers' strike in the Pacific Northwest that's still going on. The problems have left the company strapped for cash, so it's offering more than 100 million shares of stock in an attempt to raise money. On Monday, it had raised $21 billion, a record for equity fundraising by an American company. Economic experts say raising money will help Boeing avoid a downgrade in its credit rating, which would make its financial troubles even worse. The CDC says it's seeing an unusually large number of 2 to 4-year-olds getting walking pneumonia this year. Officials at the CDC said it's strange to see these numbers in toddlers because walking pneumonia usually affects older kids. It's not totally clear why walking pneumonia cases are going up in these younger kids lately. One theory, though, is that toddlers stayed home more during the height of the pandemic, so they don't have any immunity to the bacteria that causes walking pneumonia. It's worth noting data shows infections have gone down since a late summer peak, but doctors are worried the decrease may not last, so they want parents to be aware. They say the illness can resemble a chest cold, and common symptoms are dry cough, fever, headaches, and fatigue, and these can last for weeks or even up to a month without getting any better. Usually, though, antibiotics are an effective treatment. Legendary actress and comedian TerryGar has died. Gar starred in several classic movies like Young Frankenstein, Tootsie, and After Hours. And she got a Best Supporting Oscar nomination for her performance in Tootsie. She was also a popular guest with late-night hosts, especially Johnny Carson and David Letterman. She also hosted Saturday Night Live 3 times. Later in life, Gar was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. She became a strong advocate for those with the disease and pushed for more research and better treatments. Gar ultimately died of complications from MS. She was 79. It's pretty rare to get new music from a composer who's been dead for more than 150 years. But that's exactly what happened when a New York museum curator discovered a lost Chopin waltz in a vault. The Morgan Library and Museum's curator was cataloging items for a new collection when he stumbled on an unknown musical score. It had no signature, but it read Chopin across the top of the score, and the Polish composer had a unique way of writing that tipped off the curator. A Chopin expert examined the music and determined it was likely by the famous composer who died at just 39 years old. Though it's not 100% certain Chopin himself composed the music, the musician who played the piece for the New York Times said it sounds like him. And both the curator and Chopin expert he consulted say they welcome outside expert opinions as well. At the very least, there's a new waltz in the world that was actually written sometime in the early 1830s. And that's it for the main news today, so now it's time for Work Wednesday, when we break down one interesting career or work-related news story every Wednesday. But first, a quick break. Before I found Honeylove, I just thought if I wanted to wear shapewear, it would have to be uncomfortable. So I would only wear it for special occasions and if I really needed to. Thanks to Honeylove, the occasion doesn't matter because Honeylove has thought of everything to make shapewear more comfortable, cute, and effective. Like their shapewear has targeted compression technology that distinguishes between areas you want more support and areas you need less compression. It's designed to work with your body, not against it. And same goes with everything else I've gotten from Honeylove, including leggings, tanks, the list goes on. It's one of the only brands where you can tell they've really thought about the things that women typically get annoyed by, and they've fixed those issues. Honeylove has you covered for the everyday look, workouts, weddings, and more. So treat yourself to the best bras, shapewear, leggings, and more on the market and save 20% off at honeylove.com/newsworthy. Use our exclusive link to get 20% off at honeylove.com/newsworthy. After your purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them, so please support our show and tell them we sent you. Say yes to every adventure with Honeylove. Okay, now back to Work Wednesday. The election is less than a week away, so did you know that in some states, your employer is required to give you time off to vote? There is no federal law with this requirement, but yeah, in 28 states and the District of Columbia, workers have the right by law to take time off to vote, usually between 1 and 3 hours, though Kentucky allows the most time for voting at 4 hours. And most say it has to be paid time off. Only 4 states say it does not have to be paid. Those states are Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, and Massachusetts. And while a 29th state, North Dakota, does not require employers to let their workers vote, it does have a law encouraging workplaces to allow time off. But even if you're in a state that requires it, be aware you may have to let your boss know in advance. States like California and New York say you have to give 2 days' notice to your boss. Though those 2 states also say employers have to tell their workers all of their voting options ahead of time. If you want to learn more about the specific rules where you live, we posted a link in our episode notes on our website to a list from a law firm that explains all the workplace voting rules for each state. Or you can go to vote411.org, select your state, and then look for the Time Off to Vote tab on the side to read all about your state's rules. All right, thank you so much for listening today. We'll catch you up on more news to know tomorrow. Until then, have a great day.